A sneer twisted the flight attendant's lips. "Ma'am, I've told you 3 times. You are holding up this flight. You need to leave." Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 72 years old, gripped her worn purse, her knuckles white. She was being ejected from her own paid-for seat. Passengers were filming their whispers a chorus of shame. But as the steward, Julian, moved to physically remove her, the cockpit door burst open. "Stop!" the captain's voice boomed. "You touch her, and you're in federal custody." The steward froze. The captain stared at him, his eyes burning with a fury Julian couldn't understand. "I am not flying this plane," the pilot declared, "until Mrs. Vance is back in her seat." The terminal at Los Angeles International Airport was a cathedral of chaos. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the Tom Bradley terminal, illuminating the dust motes dancing over weary travelers. Global Air Flight 714 to Atlanta was boarding at Gate B-22, and the atmosphere was thick with impatience. Mrs. Eleanor Vance sat quietly, her back straight, in one of the uncomfortable metal chairs. At 72, she was a woman of profound, quiet dignity. She wore a simple navy blue dress, comfortable loafers, and a string of modest pearls. Her grey hair was pinned back in a neat bun, and her hands, though wrinkled and marked by arthritis, rested calmly on a worn, leather-bound book in her lap. She was flying alone to visit her new granddaughter, a journey she had saved for over 6 months to make. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for passengers needing extra assistance. Eleanor, feeling the familiar ache in her knees, decided to take advantage of it. She slowly gathered her purse and her small carry-on, moving toward the line. That was when she first encountered Julian Croft. Julian was the lead flight attendant, a man in his late 30s who wore his uniform like a suit of armor. It was impeccably tailored, his blonde hair slicked back with expensive product. His smile a thin, practiced veneer that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He was scanning boarding passes with a sharp, judgmental flick of his wrist. He saw Eleanor approaching and his smile faltered, replaced by a microscopic, almost imperceptible sneer. "Pre-boarding is for passengers needing assistance, ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Yes, son," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but clear. "My arthritis is bothering me. I'd like to get settled." Julian held out his hand for her pass, not bothering to look her in the eye. He scanned it. "Eleanor Vance, seat 7B. That's an economy plus seat. You're sure you don't want to wait for general boarding? You're going to be in the way of our first-class passengers." Eleanor felt a prickle of humiliation. "I paid for seat 7B, young man. It's just past the bulkhead. I am in the correct boarding group." Julian let out an exaggerated sigh. "Fine. Go ahead." He waved her through dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. He then turned to the passenger behind her, a wealthy-looking man in a tailored suit, and flashed a brilliant 100-watt smile. "Mr. Henderson, wonderful to have you back in first class, sir. Right this way." Eleanor ignored the sting. She had faced far worse than a rude young man with too much hair gel. She focused on the jet bridge, taking one careful step at a time, her hand gliding along the cool metal wall. The smell of jet fuel and recycled air filled her lungs. She was one of the first on the plane, which was a relief. The cabin was cool and quiet. She navigated the narrow aisle to row 7. Seat 7B was on the aisle just as she'd requested, offering the extra legroom she desperately needed for the 4-hour flight. She opened the overhead bin, but before she could lift her small case, Julian was there again, appearing from the galley. "Let me help you with that," he said, his tone suggesting it was an enormous burden. He snatched the bag from her hand. It wasn't heavy, just a change of clothes and her medication, but he made a show of straining, shoving it deep into the bin. "You really should consider checking bags, ma'am," he lectured. "It frees up space for our full-fare passengers." "That is my only bag," Eleanor stated evenly. Julian didn't answer. He was already fussing over a different overhead bin, the one directly across from her seat above 7D. He opened it, looked inside at a sleek black duffel bag that was already there, and then closed it with a strange possessive click. He adjusted his tie, his eyes darting around the empty cabin, and then disappeared back to the front. Eleanor settled into her seat, pulling out the worn leather book. It was a collection of poetry, her one comfort, as other passengers began to file in the cabin filled with noise and motion. A young mother, Chloe, with a baby in a carrier, sat in the row behind her. The businessman Julian had fawned over Mr. Henderson was in 4A, visible in the first-class cabin. The boarding process was slow. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to find a moment of peace, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She opened them to find Julian standing by her row, his arms crossed, staring at her. Not at her precisely, but at the overhead bin above her seat. He was counting passengers, his face a mask of anxious calculation. He seemed wound incredibly tight, his fingers tapping a rapid, silent rhythm on his forearm. He looked at Eleanor, then at the bin, then back at Eleanor. A new passenger, a college-aged kid with headphones, arrived and pointed to 7A, the window seat. As he went to open the bin above 7A and 7B, Julian intercepted him. "Sir, that bin is full," Julian snapped. "Use the one across the aisle." The kid looked confused. "But my seat is right here. Use the other bin, or we'll check your bag," Julian said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. The kid, intimidated quickly, shoved his backpack into the bin above 7D and sat down, disappearing behind his headphones. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing unease. Julian was protecting the bin above her, but it was her bag in there, and it was tiny. Why would he call it full? The final boarding call was announced. The plane was nearly full. Julian walked back to the front, grabbed the passenger manifest on his company-issued tablet, and began walking slowly back down the aisle. He seemed to be looking for someone, or something. His eyes landed on Eleanor. The practiced smile returned, but this time it was positively reptilian. "Ah, Mrs. Vance," he said, stopping directly in front of her. "I'm so glad I caught you. We have a small problem with your seat." Eleanor looked up from her book. The cabin was buzzing as the last few passengers hurried to their seats. "A problem. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. "Yes, I know. It's a terrible mix-up," Julian said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He tapped dramatically on his tablet. "It seems our system has double-booked seat 7B. A complete error, I assure you. The other passenger is a Platinum Medallion member, and he is quite upset." Eleanor felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. She knew with absolute certainty that he was lying. "That seems unlikely. My boarding pass was scanned at the gate." "Oh, it's a new glitch," Julian said, waving his hand dismissively. "It happens, but regulations are regulations. We have to honor the frequent flyer's status. I've already found you another seat." He pointed toward the back of the plane. "We have an opening in 34E. It's a middle seat, but it's all we have." The thought of sitting for 4 hours in a cramped middle seat, her knees jammed against the seat in front of her, made Eleanor wince. "Young man, I cannot sit in a middle seat. I have severe arthritis. I specifically paid for this aisle seat for the leg room. There must be another option." Julian's plastic smile tightened. His eyes flicked again to the overhead bin above her head. He was getting desperate. "Ma'am, the option is 34E, or you can choose to deplane, and we will rebook you on the next available flight, which," he checked his watch, "appears to be tomorrow morning. We are already behind schedule. You are holding up over 200 people." His voice had risen, and the passengers in the surrounding rows went silent, turning to watch. The young mother Chloe looked on with sympathy. Mr. Henderson, the businessman in first class, peered over his seat. "I am not holding anyone up," Eleanor said, her voice remaining quiet but firm. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for. Here is my boarding pass. Here is my receipt." She reached into her purse to retrieve the printed itinerary. "I don't need to see that." Julian snapped, his facade of politeness vanishing completely. "I have the manifest right here. It says 7B belongs to a Mr. Peterson. You are... well, you're not Mr. Peterson." "Then your manifest is wrong," Eleanor said. "This is not a debate, ma'am," Julian hissed. "You are being non-compliant. Airline regulations state that you must follow the instructions of the flight crew. My instruction is to move to 34E. "And my response is no," Eleanor said. She was not a confrontational woman, but she was a woman of principle. This was not about a seat anymore. This was about being bullied, about being singled out and humiliated. "I see," Julian said slowly. He took a step back, his eyes glinting with a cold, triumphant malice. "So you are refusing a crew member's direct order. Is that what I'm hearing?" "You are hearing that I am staying in the seat I purchased," Eleanor corrected him. "That's it." Julian whipped out his internal communicator phone. "This is Julian Croft, lead flight attendant. I have a non-compliant passenger in 7B. She is refusing to move and delaying departure. I need security at the jet bridge. Yes, remove her." A wave of gasps went through the cabin. "You're having her removed?" Chloe, the young mother, exclaimed from the row behind. "She hasn't done anything. She was just explaining her situation." "Ma'am, please stay out of official airline business," Julian snapped at her. Mr. Henderson stood up in first class. "Now see here, Steward. This is absurd. I've been watching this. You've been harassing this woman since she boarded. Just find another solution. Upgrade someone. Don't kick an old lady off the plane." Julian's face turned a shade of mottled red. He was losing control and he knew it. But he was in too deep. He pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. "Ma'am, I am giving you one final chance. Move to 34E, or you will be arrested for interfering with a flight crew." "Arrested?" Eleanor's voice for the first time wavered. She looked at the faces around her, some sympathetic, some annoyed, some just staring at their phones. Before she could even process the threat, two large men in dark blue airport security uniforms appeared at the door of the plane, their faces grim. "Right here, officers," Julian said, gesturing to Eleanor. "This woman. She is refusing to comply with safety instructions and is holding up the entire aircraft. She needs to be removed. Now." The two security officers, a tall man named Officer Miller and a shorter, stockier man named Officer Sanchez, made their way down the narrow aisle. The cabin had fallen into a thick, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the auxiliary power unit, and Chloe's baby, who, sensing the tension, began to fuss. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice surprisingly gentle but firm. "I'm Officer Miller. The flight attendant says you're refusing to take your assigned seat." "No, officer," Eleanor said, her hands trembling slightly as she held up her boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat. 7B. I paid for it. This man," she motioned to Julian, "is trying to move me to a middle seat in the back. I told him I cannot sit there due to a medical condition. Now he is having me removed." Officer Miller looked from the boarding pass to Julian. "Sir, her pass says 7B. Julian scoffed, tapping his tablet furiously. "The pass is irrelevant. The manifest is what matters. The system has reassigned her. She is being disruptive. Officers, we are 10 minutes past our scheduled departure. The captain is going to be furious. Get her off. We can sort out the manifest at the gate." Officer Sanchez, the stockier one, crossed his arms. "We don't get involved in seating disputes, sir. That's a customer service issue. It became a security issue when she refused a crew member's direct order." Julian shot back, his voice oily and insistent. "She is a threat to the good order of this flight. Remove her, or I will file a report against you for non-intervention." The officers exchanged a look. Their hands were tied. A flight attendant's declaration of non-compliance, especially one that was holding up a flight, gave them little choice. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice full of regret, "I'm sorry, but we have to ask you to come with us. You have to deplane." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of reprieve. She found none. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed every rule, and she was being treated like a criminal. Slowly, deliberately, she began to gather her things. She tucked her poetry book into her purse. She clicked the buckle on the strap. "This is an outrage," Mr. Henderson said loudly from first class. "Global Air will be hearing from my legal team. This is age discrimination and it's just plain wrong." Several passengers had their phones out, now openly recording. Julian noticed and tried to wave them off. "Put those phones away. It is illegal to film airline security procedures." This was another lie, and everyone knew it. The red recording light stayed on. Eleanor stood up, her knees cracking in protest. She reached for the overhead bin, the one Julian had so aggressively protected. "I need my bag, please." "I'll get it," Julian snapped. He reached up, opened the bin, and froze. His eyes widened in panic. He seemed to have forgotten, just for a second, what was in there. He was looking at Eleanor's small, modest suitcase, but next to it was the sleek black duffel bag he had checked on earlier, the one that did not belong to the college kid. He quickly grabbed Eleanor's bag, almost throwing it at her, and slammed the bin shut. The gesture was so violent that the latch didn't quite catch. "Now let's go," Julian ordered. Eleanor, her face a mask of dignified sorrow, took her bag. She did not look at Julian. She looked at the sympathetic face of Chloe, the mother. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who was shaking his head in disgust. Then she turned and began the long, shameful walk back up the aisle. The security officers walked in front of her, and behind her a grim escort. The silence in the cabin was now deafening. Every eye was on her. She felt like a thief being paraded through the town square. She stepped out of the aircraft and into the cold, sterile tube of the jet bridge. The door to the plane closed behind her, with a heavy, final-sounding thump. Officer Miller sighed. "Ma'am, I'm truly sorry about this. You can speak to the gate agent and they'll get you sorted out. He had no right to." "It's all right, officer," Eleanor said, her voice shaking, but her dignity intact. "You were just doing your job." They left her there, standing alone in the jet bridge, just feet from the sealed aircraft door. She was in a strange limbo, not in the airport, not on the plane. She leaned against the wall, the vibrations of the aircraft's engines rattling her bones. Inside the plane, Julian straightened his tie. His face was flushed with victory. He had done it. He had removed the obstacle. He walked to the front galley, picked up the intercom, and pressed the button. Ladies and gentlemen, his smooth voice purred over the speakers. We do apologize for that slight delay. We had to resolve a seating discrepancy. We will now be continuing with our safety demonstration. He was halfway through the speech about seatbelts when a sharp electronic click cut him off. A new voice filled the cabin, a voice that was calm, deep, and held an unmistakable edge of absolute authority. Flight attendants hold all preparations. This is Captain Thorne. A pause. Julian, please report to the cockpit, immediately. The blood drained from Julian Croft's face. In the hierarchy of an aircraft, the pilot in command was the undisputed federally mandated authority. A request to report to the cockpit was not a request. It was a summons, and it never ever happened after the door was sealed and during the safety briefing unless something was catastrophically wrong. The passengers who had just been settling in all looked up. Mr. Henderson smirked. Yes, Captain," Julian stammered into the intercom. He hung it up, his hands visibly shaking. He smoothed his jacket and began the walk of shame past the first-class cabin to the cockpit door. He knocked a light tap-tap-tap. The door was pulled open from the inside. Captain Marcus Thorne stood in the opening, filling the doorway. Marcus was a man in his early 40s, with a commanding presence and an air of no-nonsense professionalism. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. His dark eyes, however, were currently burning with a cold fire. "Get in," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. Julian squeezed past him into the small, darkened cockpit. The co-pilot, a younger man named Ben, was pretending to be intensely interested in his pre-flight checklist, wanting no part of the drama. Marcus didn't close the door. He wanted the other attendants to hear. He held up his personal cell phone. On the screen was a video already sent to him by a passenger in 4A, Mr. Henderson. The video clearly showed Julian berating Eleanor. It showed her polite, firm refusals. It showed Julian threatening her and calling security. "Explain this," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, which was far more terrifying than if he had been yelling. Julian's mind raced. He had to control the narrative. "Captain, it was a simple matter of non-compliance. The passenger in 7B was disruptive. Our manifest showed a double booking a glitch. She refused a direct crew order to move holding up the flight. I followed protocol. I had her removed so we could get underway." Marcus stared at him unblinking. "You followed protocol?" "Yes, Captain. Section 4, paragraph 12 of the flight crew manual. Non-compliant passengers." "Shut up," Marcus said. Not loudly, but with such finality that Julian's words died in his throat. "I don't care about your manual, Julian. I care about that." He pointed to the phone. "I saw a flight attendant threatening and humiliating an elderly woman who was doing nothing but sitting in her paid-for seat." "But the manifest," Julian began, his voice cracking. "The manifest is wrong," Marcus said. "I had Ben cross-check the ticket purchase with dispatch. Seat 7B was purchased 3 months ago by an Eleanor Vance. There is no Mr. Peterson. You fabricated that." Julian was cornered. I must have misread the tablet. It's a stressful boarding process, Captain. Regardless, she refused to move. "So you kicked her off the plane," Marcus finished. "You threw an old woman off my aircraft." "She was holding us up," Julian pleaded, desperation creeping in. "We're already late for our slot." Marcus leaned in his face inches from Julian's. "We are not late. We are grounded. Because of you." He turned to his co-pilot. "Ben, call the gate. Tell them to open the jet bridge. Tell them to find the passenger we just ejected and bring her to the cockpit." Captain, we can't do that. Julian yelped, a note of pure panic in his voice. The door is sealed. The V-specs are set. Reopening, the door will trigger a full security sweep. We'll be delayed for hours. The company will— I don't give a damn about the company right now, Marcus growled. I give a damn about the woman you left in a jet bridge. He turned back to Julian, his eyes narrowing. What is her name? The passenger. Julian fumbled. Vance. Eleanor Vance. The name hit Captain Marcus Thorne like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand grabbing the back of his chair. His face, which had been a mask of professional anger, suddenly crumpled into something else entirely. Disbelief, shock, and then a profound, bottomless rage. What did you say? Marcus whispered. Vance. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Why? Marcus Thorne closed his eyes for a moment. He saw a different time, a run-down apartment complex in South Atlanta. He saw a skinny 16-year-old kid, full of anger and lost potential, sitting on a fire escape. And he saw a kind woman with warm hands bringing him a plate of food and a book. The same woman who later co-signed a scholarship application for a long-shot aviation program. Get her, Marcus said, his voice now dangerously calm. Get her back on this plane, now, or I will have you arrested for endangering a passenger. Endangering? Julian was completely lost. She has arthritis. You left her standing in a cold jet bridge. That's endangerment in my book. Now move. Marcus grabbed the cockpit PA microphone, his knuckles white. His voice boomed through the cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Thorne again. It appears a member of my cabin crew has made a grievous error and has wrongfully removed a passenger from this flight. We will be returning to the gate to retrieve her. The cabin erupted in a mix of groans and applause. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his eyes locked on Julian, I will not be departing from this gate. I will not fly this airplane, and none of us will be going to Atlanta until Mrs. Eleanor Vance is back in her assigned seat, with a full personal apology from the man who removed her. The ultimatum hung in the air, thick and undeniable. The passengers were stunned into silence, and then a ripple of approval started. Mr. Henderson in 4A shouted, Now that's what I'm talking about. Give 'em hell, Captain. Julian was hyperventilating. This was a nightmare. A career-ending blacklist-level nightmare. A pilot overriding a lead attendant publicly, grounding a flight over a passenger dispute. It was unheard of. Captain, please, Julian begged, his voice a pathetic whine. Think of the logistics, the paperwork, the delay, the cost. We can compensate the woman at the gate. We can give her vouchers. We don't need to bring her back. This isn't about compensation, Julian, Marcus said, his voice flat. He pointed out the cockpit window. The jet bridge is already moving back. You have two choices. You can go out there, find Mrs. Vance, beg her forgiveness, and escort her back to her seat. Or you can take your luggage and get off my plane right now, and I will have you replaced by a reserve crew member, which will, I promise you, take even longer. Julian stared at him, realizing he had no cards left to play. His entire career was perched on the edge of a knife, and Captain Thorne was holding the handle. But there was more than just his career at stake. There was the black duffel bag, the bag in the overhead bin at 7D, just across from Eleanor's seat. The bag he had so carefully protected. The bag he had to retrieve before landing in Atlanta. His panic wasn't just about being fired. It was about being caught. He had to get back on that plane. He had to get that bag, and to do that, he had to bring the old woman back. Fine. Julian seethed, his face pale and sweaty. I'll get her. You do that, Marcus said. He turned to his co-pilot. Ben, you have the con. I'm going to supervise this. Marcus unbuckled himself from his command chair, a violation of protocol as the door was unsealing. But he didn't care. He followed Julian out of the cockpit and stood at the front of the aircraft, his arms crossed, watching. The heavy hiss of the door unsealing echoed through the cabin. The gate agent, a young woman named Maria, looked bewildered as the door opened. Captain, what's... We're retrieving a passenger, Maria. Stand by, Marcus said. Julian, his uniform now looking rumpled and his hair slightly askew, stepped past him and into the jet bridge. Eleanor Vance was still there. She had sat down on the cold industrial carpet, her back against the wall, her poetry book open on her lap. She looked small, tired, and profoundly sad. She looked up as Julian approached, her eyes showing no fear, only a deep, weary disappointment. Julian had prepared a speech, a quick, dismissive apology. But when he saw Captain Thorne standing in the doorway of the plane behind him, watching him like a hawk, he knew he had to make it look good. He plastered on the most sincere, sickeningly sweet smile he could muster. He knelt an awkward, stiff gesture. Mrs. Vance, my deepest, most humble apologies, he began. There has been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. My tablet, it was showing incorrect data. A completely baffling glitch. Eleanor just looked at him. Your seat 7B is, of course, yours. It was my error. I was stressed from the delay, and I acted hastily. It was unprofessional, and I am so very sorry. He offered a hand to help her up. Eleanor ignored it and used the wall to push herself to her feet, her joints aching. The captain, Julian continued, gesturing back to the plane, has insisted you rejoin us. He has, graciously, held the flight for you. Eleanor looked past Julian's shoulder at the tall, imposing figure in the pilot's uniform, standing in the doorway. She couldn't make out his features in the shadow, but she felt a strange pull. She picked up her small bag. Very well, she said, her voice quiet. She walked past Julian, as if he were a piece of furniture, her head held high. As she reached the threshold of the plane, she stepped into the light of the cabin. She looked up to thank the pilot who had intervened. Her eyes met his. The world seemed to stop. The noise of the cabin, the hum of the engines, the muttering of the passengers, it all faded away. The captain's stern, professional mask dissolved. His eyes widened, and a look of stunned, joyous recognition washed over his face. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, my Ellie. The captain whispered the name, a forgotten relic from a life long past. Is that you, Mrs. Vance? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Marcus Little, Marcus Thorne. From the apartment on Peachtree. Captain Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his $2,000 uniform and his FAA credentials forgotten. He wasn't a captain. He was a 16-year-old kid again, standing in front of the woman who had saved his life. He wrapped his arms around her in a hug that lifted her clean off her feet. Ellie, he breathed. I can't believe it's you. The entire plane, which had been expecting a brief, awkward apology, was now watching a deeply emotional and utterly confusing reunion. Julian Croft, standing in the jet bridge behind them, watched this scene with a dawning, sickening horror. This wasn't a random passenger. This wasn't a glitch. This was family. Captain Marcus Thorne finally set Eleanor down, though he kept his hands on her shoulders as if to assure himself she was real. Ellie, what are you doing on this flight I haven't seen you in? It must be 20 years. I was flying to Atlanta to see my granddaughter, Eleanor said, wiping a tear from her eye. Oh, Marcus, look at you, a captain. I always knew you'd do it. I always knew you had it in you. The passengers were utterly silent, hanging on every word. Julian, meanwhile, was trying to slip back onto the plane, unnoticed, his eyes darting frantically toward the overhead bins at row 7. Marcus saw him. Julian, stay right where you are. Julian froze half in and half out of the plane. Marcus turned back to Eleanor, then to the entire cabin. He picked up the intercom receiver from the galley wall. His voice, thick with emotion, filled the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe you all an explanation. Most of you are, rightly, upset about this delay. And you deserve to know why. He put one arm around Eleanor's shoulders. My name is Marcus Thorne, but I wasn't always a captain. I grew up in a part of Atlanta you don't see in magazines. I had no father, and my mother worked 3 jobs. By the time I was 16, I was on a fast track to prison, or worse. I was angry, I was lost, and I had given up. He paused, looking down at Eleanor, who was watching him with a look of pure maternal pride. This woman, he said, his voice cracking, lived in the apartment below us. Mrs. Eleanor Ellie Vance. She saw me sitting on the fire escape one night and brought me a sandwich. She didn't lecture me. She didn't judge me. She just sat with me. She did that every night for a whole summer. She brought me books. She taught me to see a world beyond my own anger. When I told her as a joke that I wanted to fly planes, she didn't laugh. She took me to an air show. A year later, when I got a conditional acceptance into a small aviation college but had no way to pay the tuition, this woman who worked as a housekeeper co-signed a loan. She cashed in her own small retirement savings to pay for my scholarship, as she called it. He locked eyes with Julian, his expression turning to stone. I am the captain of this aircraft. I have this uniform, and I have this life because of this woman. And you? His voice dropped to a terrifying growl. You put her in a jet bridge. A collective gasp went through the plane. Mr. Henderson was on his feet. My God. The full weight of what had happened of the karma and the connection landed on everyone. Julian, seeing his entire world evaporate, made a desperate move. This was his last chance. He shoved past the stunned gate agent Maria and lunged into the cabin, sprinting down the aisle toward row 7. He's running! Chloe screamed. Marcus, reacting on pure instinct, yelled, Stop him! But Julian was fast. He reached row 7. He wasn't going for the exit, he was going for the overhead bins. He jumped up and clawed at the bin above 7D, the one where the college kid had put his bag. He ripped it open, and it was empty, save for the kid's backpack. Wrong bin. In his panic, he turned and yanked on the bin above Eleanor's seat, 7B, the one he had slammed shut earlier, the one whose latch hadn't quite caught. The door flew open, and 2 things fell out. First, Eleanor's small blue suitcase. Second, the sleek black duffel bag that Julian had stashed there earlier, the one he had tried to protect by kicking Eleanor out of her seat. The duffel bag hit the armrest of 7A and burst open. It wasn't clothes that spilled out. It was dozens of airline-issued mini liquor bottles, stacks of sealed first-class amenity kits, and landing with a soft thud on the carpet, 3 passenger wallets and a woman's diamond bracelet. Mr. Henderson, who had moved up the aisle, pointed. That's my wallet. I thought I left it at the security check. Julian had been running a smuggling and theft ring. He was using his lead attendant position to steal from first-class passengers while they slept and stashing the goods in an empty-looking bag in the Economy Plus bins, which he would then retrieve upon landing. Eleanor's presence in 7B right under his stash, was a direct threat. He couldn't risk her seeing him retrieve the bag. He couldn't risk the bin being opened. He had to get her out. His prejudice against her had just been a convenient excuse, a tool to enact his desperate criminal plan. Julian dove for the spilled items, trying to scoop them back into the bag. "Don't move!" Officer Miller and Officer Sanchez, who had heard the commotion and run back onto the plane, were now on him. They tackled him to the ground in the aisle, right at Eleanor's feet. The scene in the cabin of Flight 714 descended into controlled chaos. Julian Croft, no longer a prim and proper steward, but a desperate cornered criminal, was struggling furiously against the two airport security officers. "Get off me!" he shrieked, his voice a raw, ugly sound. "You don't know what you're doing." "I think we know exactly what we're doing, Mr. Croft." Officer Miller grunted, cranking Julian's arm behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed in the silent cabin. Captain Marcus Thorne had moved instantly to shield Eleanor, placing himself between her and the arrest. He looked down at the man sobbing on the floor of his aircraft. The sheer pathetic greed of it all, the tiny bottles, the wallets, it was all so small, yet it had led to an act of such profound cruelty. He was stealing, Chloe said from her row, her baby mercifully quiet, just watching with wide eyes. "He was," Marcus confirmed, his voice cold. He looked at the officers. "He's all yours. Get this man off my plane. He is a federal security threat." "Wait!" Julian screamed, his face pressed into the aisle carpet. "Thorne, you can't. We had a deal. You said if I brought her back." "The deal was you apologize and she gets her seat," Marcus said, his voice flat. "The deal did not include you committing multiple felonies on my aircraft. You are grounded, Julian. Permanently." As the officers hauled Julian to his feet, he gave one last hateful glare at Eleanor. "This is your fault, you old—" "That's enough," Officer Sanchez said, shoving him forward. They escorted Julian off the plane, this time for good. He was walked past the bewildered gate agents through the terminal and to a secure holding area, his career and his freedom ending in the same terminal where he had just an hour before reigned like a petty king. Back on the plane, the atmosphere was electric. The delay was now indefinite, but no one was complaining. Marcus Thorne took a deep breath and addressed the cabin. "Folks, I don't even know where to begin. First, I apologize for the extreme delay. We will have to wait for a new lead flight attendant, and the scene will need to be cleared. But I want to thank you all for your patience." He turned to Mr. Henderson. "Sir, I believe we have your wallet." "Incredible," Henderson said, shaking his head as he retrieved it. "I'm just incredible." Marcus then turned to Eleanor, his expression softening completely. "Ellie, 7B is not going to work." Eleanor's face fell just for a second before Marcus smiled. "You're with me. Come on." He gently took her small suitcase from her and led her past the first-class curtain. He stopped at seat 1A, the best seat on the plane. "This is your seat." "Oh, Marcus, I can't." "It's the least I can do," he insisted. He stowed her bag, then knelt by her seat. "Are you all right, truly?" "I am now," she said, placing her hand on his. "I am so proud of you, Marcus. You became such a good man." "I had a good teacher," he replied, his voice thick. An hour later, a new lead attendant had arrived, the mess was cleaned up, and statements were taken. Global Air Flight 714 finally pushed back from the gate. During the flight, Marcus emerged from the cockpit and spent 20 minutes sitting with Eleanor in first class, the co-pilot managing the flight. They caught up on 20 years of life. He learned about her children, her new granddaughter, and the husband she had lost 5 years prior. She learned about his wife, his 2 sons, and his steady climb from a regional prop plane to the captain's chair of a 767. The entire cabin crew, mortified by Julian's actions, treated Eleanor like royalty, plying her with hot tea, warm blankets, and endless apologies. When they landed in Atlanta, Marcus was the first one at the door. He personally escorted Eleanor off the plane, carrying her bag all the way to the arrivals hall, where her daughter was waiting. The karma for Julian Croft was, as the passengers later noted, swift and hard. He was fired by Global Air before the flight even landed. He faced a slew of state and federal charges, multiple counts of theft, interfering with a flight crew, a charge Captain Thorne personally pursued, and assault for lunging at the officers. His name was added to the airline no-fly list, not as a passenger, but as an employee. He was blacklisted from the industry for life. The videos taken by passengers went viral, and the story was picked up by major news outlets. Global Air, facing a public relations catastrophe, went into overdrive. They issued a public apology to Mrs. Vance, refunded her ticket, and awarded her free flights for life. Captain Marcus Thorne was publicly commended for his decisive action in upholding the company's core values. But for Marcus, the real reward came a week later at a Sunday barbecue, where he introduced his 2 young sons to the angel who had given their father his wings. The events of Global Air Flight 714 did not end when the wheels touched down in Atlanta. The story, captured on a dozen smartphones, had achieved a velocity that corporate damage control could not match. By the time Julian Croft was being processed in a holding cell at Atlanta Hartsfield, the video of Captain Thorne's emotional speech, cross-cut with Julian's earlier sneering dismissal of Eleanor, was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. The corporate headquarters of Global Air in Chicago was in full-blown panic, in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom on the 48th floor. The Vice President of Public Relations, Cynthia Hayes, stared at a screen showing their stock ticker. GBLA was in a nosedive, having already shed over $800 million in market value. He called her Ellie, Cynthia said, rubbing her temples. The pilot knows her. He didn't just save a passenger, he saved his mentor. You can't write this, you can't buy this, and right now it's crucifying us. Robert Blevin, the CEO. A man who usually looked like he was carved from expensive granite, looked grey. "What's the status on Croft?" "Fired," Cynthia snapped. "That was the first thing we did. We issued a statement 30 minutes ago. Mr. Croft's actions are in direct violation of our company's core values. Blah, blah, blah." No one cares. They're calling for boycotts. They're calling our entire company racist, ageist. And now a den of thieves. "The theft ring," Blevin growled. "That's what's killing us. It wasn't just prejudice. It was a cover for a criminal enterprise." "Exactly," Cynthia agreed. "It makes us look incompetent at best and complicit at worst. We have to get ahead of this. We need a new narrative." "What narrative?" Blevin asked. Cynthia spun her chair to the whiteboard. "We don't fight the story. We become the story. We champion the heroes. Captain Thorne is our new face. He's our hero. And Mrs. Vance, she's our angel. We are flying her and her entire family first class to Chicago tomorrow. You, Robert, are going to apologize to her personally in front of every camera we can fit in the lobby. We're not just refunding her flight. We're giving her $1 million frequent flyer miles and a check. A large check. For her trouble. Blevin nodded. And the scholarship, Thorne's scholarship. We're endowing it, Cynthia said, a predatory smile returning to her face. The Global Air Eleanor Vance Aviation Scholarship. We'll pledge $5 million to start. We're not just a company that made a mistake. We're a company that learns. We're a family. And we protect our family. Thorne and Vance are now the biggest PR assets we have. Use them. While Cynthia Hayes was spinning the future, Julian Croft was facing his present. He stood in a drab, windowless courtroom for his arraignment, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit. The slicked-back hair was gone, replaced by a matted, greasy mess. The cold blue eyes were now wide, red-rimmed, and darting with pure terror. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Riley, was not holding back. Your Honor, the state requests that bail be denied for Mr. Julian Croft. The defendant is a clear and present flight risk. Flight risk, Julian's public defender. A young, overwhelmed man squeaked. My client has been a model employee for... A model employee, Riley interrupted, her voice dripping with scorn. Your Honor, Mr. Croft was not just committing simple opportunistic theft. We have evidence corroborated by testimony from other crew members who were suspicious that Mr. Croft was the linchpin of an organized theft ring operating for at least 2 years. He used his lead attendant status to identify high-value targets in first class, steal their effects, wallets, jewelry, electronics, and then stash the goods in a pre-arranged carry-on bag, which he would place in an economy overhead bin, often in a row, with a vacant seat or, as in this case, a passenger he believed he could easily intimidate. Julian's eyes squeezed shut. It was true. The plan was always to use a bin in the back. But his partner in Atlanta, a baggage handler who would retrieve the bag, had messaged him that airport security was tightening checks. He needed to stash it in a bin closer to the front in the Economy Plus section to retrieve it himself during deplaning and pass it off in the terminal. Eleanor's seat 7B was directly beneath his chosen spot. Her presence was a direct complication to a multi-thousand-dollar smuggling operation. His cruelty wasn't random. It was the panicked, desperate act of a man trying to protect his real crime. The charges are extensive, Your Honor, Riley continued. Multiple counts of grand larceny, conspiracy to commit theft, and most seriously, we are petitioning the U.S. Attorney to file federal charges for interference with a flight crew. His actions in fabricating a manifest error and using security to remove Mrs. Vance were not just a customer service dispute. They were a deliberate, fraudulent act that endangered a passenger and compromised the safety and security of the flight, all to protect his stolen goods. The judge, an older man, with a face like a tired bloodhound, looked at Julian over his spectacles. Mr. Croft, you took a position of public trust. Passengers on an aircraft are at their most vulnerable. They trust the flight crew with their lives, their safety, and their property. You have violated that trust in the most egregious way possible. You are the very definition of a rot in the system. I can't go to jail, Julian whispered, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. Please, I'll pay it back. Bail is denied, the judge said, his gavel striking the wood with a deafening crack. The defendant will be remanded to custody until trial. Julian collapsed, a hollow, wailing sound escaping him as the bailiff pulled him up and led him away. The hard karma had landed, and it was unyielding. He was no longer a man in a crisp uniform. He was an inmate, his life reduced to a 6-by-8-foot cell, his future a foregone conclusion. miles away in a quiet, sunlit suburb of Atlanta, Eleanor Vance sat on a plush sofa, a new tiny sleeping baby nestled in her arms. Her granddaughter Lily was perfect. Her daughter Grace sat beside her, holding her hand. "They're calling you the avenging angel on the internet, Mum," Grace said, scrolling through her phone with a small, wry smile. Eleanor sighed, looking down at the baby. "It's all so much noise. I just wanted to see her. That poor, angry young man. I almost feel sorry for him." "Don't," Grace said firmly. "He humiliated you. He tried to have you arrested. He deserved what he got." The doorbell rang. Grace went to answer it and returned a moment later with Captain Marcus Thorne, now dressed in a simple polo shirt and jeans. He held a large bouquet of lilies in one hand. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his deep voice softened. "Marcus?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Come sit. Meet Lily." Marcus sat down, his large, capable hands looking giant and gentle as he lightly touched the baby's head. "She's beautiful, Ellie. Just beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the chaotic noise of the world, the news trucks camped at the end of the street, the endlessly ringing phone fading away. "I came to tell you something," Marcus said finally. "I just got off the phone with the CEO of Global Air. They're very apologetic, as you can imagine. They sent a car. They want to fly me to Chicago," Eleanor said, sighing. "You don't have to go," Marcus said quickly. "You don't have to do any of it. But there was one thing I insisted on, and they agreed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, folded piece of paper. It was a press release, not yet public. "They are establishing a scholarship, Ellie, in your name. The Eleanor Vance Second Chance Scholarship. It's a fully endowed perpetual fund for underprivileged youth from our old neighborhood schools, specifically for flight school and aviation maintenance programs." Eleanor's hand went to her pearls. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not for sadness or humiliation. "The money you used for me, the money you lost from your retirement. This is that, Marcus, but it's for all of them, for all the other kids sitting on fire escapes." "That's right," Marcus said, his own voice thick. "Your one act of kindness for one stupid kid. It's going to change hundreds of lives. That's your real legacy, Ellie. Not what happened on that plane. What happened before." Eleanor Vance looked from the hero pilot she had raised to the granddaughter in her arms, and for the first time in days, she laughed. It was the sound of a circle being completed, of a long overdue debt being paid in the most wonderful way imaginable. The karma that had crushed Julian Croft had in turn lifted Eleanor Vance higher than any airplane could ever fly. That day on Flight 714, a simple act of prejudice collided with a lifetime of kindness, and the result was explosive. Julian Croft learned the hard way that the person you dismiss today might just be the cornerstone of someone else's entire life. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a woman of quiet strength, reminded everyone that dignity is not something given but something you carry, and Captain Marcus Thorne proved that you never ever forget the people who helped you fly. A pilot's first duty is to the safety of his passengers, and that day, Captain Thorne saved the most important passenger of his career. What did you think of this incredible story of karma and connection? Do you believe Julian got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where arrogance is met with justice, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama every single week.